I never imagined the day would come when someone I trusted more than anyone in the world could betray me so completely. My name is Thomas Green, and at 52 years old, I'd lived a life I thought was steady, simple, and predictable. I had built my small business from scratch, pouring my blood, sweat, and late nights into it. I had raised 3 kids with the hope that they would grow up knowing the value of honesty, hard work, and family. And then came Helen, my sister, my own flesh and blood, the one person I believed would never deceive me, sitting across the kitchen table from me with her usual smile. Seemed like the kind of image you would see in old photographs, frozen in happy memories. But that morning, everything changed. The phone rang. And at first I thought it was some telemarketer. I almost ignored it. I had just poured my coffee and settled into the comfort of my quiet morning, the sunlight streaming in through the blinds, warming my hands. But the voice on the other end cut through the warmth like ice. It was calm, clinical, and utterly devastating. The investigator introduced himself, and without preamble told me that my signature had been forged on multiple documents, and that financial moves had been made in my name that I had never authorized. I remember the room spinning around me, and I gripped the edge of the table as though it could anchor me against the storm. Inside my head, my mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. But the evidence was already real. The numbers were tangible, the papers verified. Suddenly, my years of careful planning and trust seemed fragile and vulnerable as glass shattering under the weight of an unexpected blow. I had known Helen since the day she was born. I had held her as a baby. I had celebrated her birthdays, watched her grow into a clever, witty woman. I had believed in her without question. But now I was being told that she had taken advantage of me. The betrayal was so deep that for a moment I could barely breathe. My hands shook as I set the phone down, my coffee long forgotten growing cold in its cup. I could feel a heavy knot in my chest, like a weight pressing down on my lungs. I kept asking myself, how could someone so close do something so calculated, so hurtful? Could it really be my sister? Could she really have done this? Could the memories of laughter shared and secrets exchanged be illusions masking deceit? The more I tried to convince myself it was impossible, the heavier the truth became, until denial was no longer a comfort, but a trap. I knew instinctively that this was not just a mistake or an accident. This was intentional, deliberate, and it demanded a response. I could not just sit back and let my life and my legacy be eroded by someone I loved so blindly. The thought of confronting her made my stomach twist. But I also knew that I needed clarity. I needed answers. I needed to reclaim control. Because whatever came next, the person who had once been family now stood on the opposite side of my world, and I could feel the line being drawn in sharp contrast between trust and betrayal, between love and deception. And I realized that from this moment, nothing would ever be the same again.
I have always considered myself a reasonable man, a man who trusted people until they gave him reason not to. And I prided myself on having lived a life of hard work and careful planning. Running my small business had been no easy feat, but it was mine, built from the ground up with long hours, countless sacrifices, and the belief that if you stayed honest, life would eventually reward you. I had 3 grown children who were carving their own paths in the world. And a quiet life in a modest suburb just outside of Chicago. Life was simple, predictable, and in many ways comforting, the kind of life where you knew your neighbors, where Saturday mornings smelled of freshly brewed coffee and newspaper pages turning, where the chaos of the world felt a little further away from your doorstep. Helen and I had grown up together in a house that had seen both laughter and arguments, the way every family does. The way every childhood carries its own mixture of warmth and friction. We had our fights, sure, but underneath it all there was the bond of siblings, the kind that survives years of distance and misunderstanding. She had always been different from me in ways I both admired and sometimes feared. She was smart in a way that seemed effortless, clever in ways I never could match, and blessed with a charm that could disarm even the most skeptical people. Even as a child, she could talk herself out of trouble, spin a story that made her seem innocent, and I had watched her do it countless times, smiling secretly at her audacity. I never imagined that those very skills could ever be turned against me, that the sister I had protected and supported could one day use that cunning to manipulate and betray. I remember the subtle signs that started to creep into my life in the months before everything fell apart. Small things I tried to dismiss as forgetfulness or coincidence. I would notice minor discrepancies in my bank statements, a few dollars here or there. Small transfers that made me pause, but not alarmed enough to investigate thoroughly. I would go through my paperwork and find files slightly out of order or missing pages. And I would tell myself I must have misplaced them. I would remember joking about old times during our phone calls or over coffee when she came to visit. The laughter and teasing a comforting reminder that despite life's pressures, family remained a constant, but quietly, like a shadow. Doubt began to seep and I noticed little things disappearing or being changed. Subtle shifts that unsettled me. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that perhaps stress had made me hyper-aware, that paranoia was whispering lies in my ear. I could not bear the thought of distrusting Helen. So I ignored the signs, turned my head, smiled, and continued with my routine. Little did I know that while I was brushing off these minor anomalies, the foundation of my life was quietly being undermined, that the calm I cherished so dearly was nothing more than the surface of a storm that was slowly gathering momentum beyond my awareness, that would one day hit with the force of a betrayal I had never imagined I would face. I had no idea that the sister I had celebrated birthdays with, shared secrets with, and defended against the world was the same person plotting to use my trust against me, and that every laugh we shared, every coffee we sipped, was masking the subtle threads of deception that would soon unravel everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the life I had built.
A week after that first chilling call, the investigator reached out again, his voice calm and measured, but the words he delivered felt like sledgehammers smashing through the careful structure of my life. He told me that Helen had not only forged my signature, but had gone even further than I had imagined. She had taken out multiple loans in my name, signed contracts I had never seen, and moved money from accounts I barely even knew existed at first. I could not believe what I was hearing. My mind stumbling over the impossibility of it. All my life I believed in fairness and trust, that honesty guided people, and yet here was the person I had loved and protected doing the exact opposite. The investigator explained that the signatures had been carefully analyzed, and it was confirmed without a shadow of a doubt that it was Helen's handwriting, not mine. That it was her penmanship on the official documents I had worked so hard to maintain and protect. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from beneath me, like I was falling through air. I kept telling myself that there must be some mistake, some technical error, some bizarre coincidence that would make everything make sense. But deep down, I knew that was wishful thinking. The evidence was overwhelming, cold and undeniable. The numbers did not lie. The transactions were traced, and my business account, the one I had nurtured for decades, had been tampered with in ways I could barely comprehend. Some of my assets, the fruits of years of labor, were suddenly no longer entirely mine. I felt a churning mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. I wanted to cry, because it felt like the betrayal had opened a wound inside me that could not be patched. My hands trembled as I held the phone. My vision blurred, not just from the shock, but from the sense of helplessness that accompanied the reality of what was happening. I thought about all the conversations, all the shared meals, all the moments of laughter with Helen, and it seemed impossible that the same person could now be on the other side, acting against me. I replayed memories in my head, searching for clues, signs I had missed, hints that might have revealed this duplicity earlier, but everything had seemed normal. Normal enough to lull me into a false sense of security, normal enough that the blow of betrayal now felt like a physical force, striking me repeatedly. I realized that what I was dealing with was not a mere mistake or misunderstanding. It was deliberate, it was calculated, it was a betrayal that cut deeper than any argument, any financial loss, any broken promise could have. I sat in my office, staring at the papers the investigator had sent over, feeling like I was trapped in some surreal nightmare where reality and trust no longer aligned. I could feel my heart pounding, my thoughts spinning, my hands clutching at empty air as I tried to process the enormity of it. All I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, to shake her and demand answers. But at the same time, I knew I had to stay composed. I had to understand the full scope of what had been done. Before I could act, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a chaos I could barely see. And knowing that one wrong move could make it all collapse, I realized that the life I thought I had, the stability and trust I had taken for granted, had been quietly eroded, and that nothing would ever feel the same again. I was forced to confront a truth I had never imagined. The person I had loved unconditionally could become my greatest threat, and the person I had spent a lifetime protecting could be the one trying to destroy everything I held dear. I knew I could not let this situation fester any longer. I had to face Helen, to look her in the eye and confront the person who had betrayed me so completely. The thought of it made my stomach twist into knots, my palms sweat, and a cold, heavy fear settle over my chest. But I forced myself to set a time, to steel my nerves, and to prepare for the storm I was about to step into. When she arrived that afternoon, she was her usual self, smiling as if nothing had changed, cheerful and charming, her eyes twinkling with a mischief that used to make me laugh. And for a fleeting second, I almost believed that maybe, somehow, I was mistaken. My heart was racing and my hands trembled, gripping the edge of the armchair as I tried to steady my voice and compose my face. I asked her gently at first about the signatures and the loans, my words careful, measured, testing the waters, hopping for a shred of truth, hopping for a mistake that could be explained. She laughed at first, the sound light and airy as though I had told a silly joke, brushing it off, her eyes darting away with the practiced charm that had disarmed me for decades. But when I pressed further, asking specifics about dates and documents, her laughter faltered, the ease in her demeanor slipping like sand through her fingers. I could see it then, the defensive wall she had built around herself, the mask that had hidden the real person I had never wanted to believe existed, the sister I had grown up with, the one I had trusted without hesitation, had become a stranger before my eyes. I could feel my chest tighten, my pulse thundering in my ears as the words I had feared were true danced on the edge of her tongue. She denied it at first, vehemently, her voice rising with frustration and irritation, a mixture of defiance and fear that betrayed the calm she tried to project. But as the minutes stretched and I pressed her with patience, with quiet persistence, she began to falter, slipping up, revealing details only she could know, hints of her involvement that were impossible to explain away. Her eyes flickered, her hands fidgeted, and her confidence cracked just enough to show the truth I had been dreading. This was no accident, no misunderstanding, no lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, calculated manipulation and betrayal. And for the first time, I truly saw it for what it was. The Helen I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone I could barely recognize, someone cunning and determined, someone who had used my own trust as a weapon against me. My mind was spinning, a torrent of anger, disbelief, and sorrow crashing over me. Yet underneath it all there was a quiet, growing resolve. I realized then that denial was her shield, her last desperate attempt to escape accountability, and that she understood I was beginning to see through her, that she could no longer rely on charm or persuasion to hide what she had done. I had to remain steady, calm, and unyielding. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed the truth, because I needed to reclaim what she had taken and to protect the life I had spent decades building. Every detail she revealed, every hesitation, every slip of the tongue confirmed my worst fears, and yet also gave me power I had never felt before, a clarity that came from seeing deception laid bare in front of me, and knowing that the next steps, however painful or difficult, would be mine to decide. This confrontation, terrifying and heartbreaking, marked a turning point in my life, a moment where innocence ended, where trust shattered, and where the path forward, though uncertain, became clear. I could no longer be passive, I could no longer ignore the truth, and I would not allow the betrayal of someone I had loved so deeply to define the rest of my life. After that confrontation, I found myself trapped in a storm of emotions I could not escape. A storm that crept into every corner of my life and refused to let go. Nights became endless stretches of wakefulness, each one heavier than the last. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me like a physical weight I could not shake off, my mind replayed every word of the investigator, every slip of Helen's voice, every hint I had ignored over the years. And the enormity of her betrayal made me feel sick to my core. I felt foolish, almost absurd, for having trusted her so completely, for having given her the benefit of the doubt for decades, for having celebrated milestones and shared secrets, and believed in the bond of family without question. Now, all of that felt like a cruel joke, a facade hiding a truth I had never imagined. I began doubting everything I had built, every financial decision, every careful plan. Every small victory I had worked for painstakingly over the years seemed fragile, as though the foundation beneath me had been quietly undermined. While I slept in blissful ignorance, my children, perceptive as they were, noticed the change in me, their faces reflecting concern when I snapped at small things, when my laughter was less frequent, when my once easygoing nature was replaced by quiet tension. I wanted to tell them the truth, to explain the horror of what had happened. But I could not bear to burden them with the weight of Helen's betrayal. I wanted to protect them from the pain, to shield them from the shock that had thrown my life into chaos. And so I carried it all alone, a silent burden pressing on my chest every moment of every day. Each time I saw Helen, whether across a room at a family gathering or in a chance encounter at a local store, a storm surged inside me, a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief that left me breathless and unsettled. I found myself questioning everything about our shared past. Our childhood memories, once a source of warmth and comfort, now felt suspect. I wondered which moments had been genuine and which had been part of a carefully constructed illusion, a version of reality that Helen had curated to mask her cunning and deceit. I remembered her laughter in the kitchen when we were kids, the way she had teased me endlessly and yet always seemed trustworthy. And I questioned whether that too had been part of a performance. My heart ached with the knowledge that the person I had loved unconditionally had been capable of such deliberate harm, and my mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. How had I missed the signs? How could someone so close do this and still look me in the eye as though nothing had changed? What did this mean for our relationship, for my family, for the life I had built so carefully? Sleep became a stranger, comfort a fleeting illusion, and every quiet moment was filled with the echoes of betrayal I had not anticipated. I felt as though I were walking through a fog, every familiar face and place tinged with suspicion, every memory altered by the shadow of doubt. Helen's actions had unsettled the very core of my life, leaving me raw, vulnerable, and yet strangely determined to regain control, to understand fully, and to ensure that the trust I had extended would never again be weaponized against me. The emotional toll was crushing, relentless, and intimate, a constant reminder that betrayal could come from the closest person in your life, and that moving forward would require strength, patience, and a willingness to confront the darkest corners of one's own heart. After weeks of turmoil, nights filled with restless thoughts and days heavy with the weight of betrayal, I came to a realization that shook me to my core, but also ignited a spark of resolve. I had two choices. I could either allow this treachery to destroy me, to consume the life I had built with sweat, sacrifice, and trust, or I could take action, take back what was rightfully mine, and reclaim some sense of control over the chaos that had infiltrated every corner of my existence. I chose the latter. Though it was not an easy decision, the first step was to arm myself with knowledge and proof, to gather every piece of evidence I could find that documented Helen's actions and their impact on my life. I spent hours poring over financial statements, contracts, emails, and transaction records, retracing years of movements I had taken for granted, each line item a reminder of how skillfully my sister had manipulated my trust. I met repeatedly with lawyers who specialized in fraud and financial misconduct, sitting in their offices with legal pads and pens. listening carefully to every detail they explained to understand the full extent of her actions. To map out the scope of what I was dealing with, I also worked closely with the investigator who had first uncovered the forgery, reviewing every report, every fingerprint of deception, making sure that nothing was overlooked or dismissed as coincidence while collecting evidence. I began documenting everything Helen did, not only financially but personally as well, every inconsistency, every evasive answer, every suspicious movement. Cataloging them meticulously, I made sure to maintain composure through it all because I knew that letting anger rule my decisions would only give her an advantage. That was something I could not allow. I reminded myself constantly that this was a chess game and not a battle of brute emotion. Every interaction, every phone call, every meeting had to be deliberate, calculated, and strategic. I created a plan to reclaim control over my life, my business, and my assets, breaking it down into careful steps, mapping each action to anticipated responses. Considering every potential setback, I was patient, knowing that the process would take time, that rushing or lashing out would be a mistake that could cost me dearly. I began to feel a sense of power slowly returning as each piece of the puzzle fell into place. A quiet satisfaction that came from knowing I was no longer entirely at the mercy of the betrayal I'd endured. Each time I filed a report, secured a document, or clarified a transaction, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten just slightly. The fog of helplessness beginning to lift. I could feel my confidence growing with every calculated step, a steady flame building into a force that would eventually allow me to confront Helen not as a man broken by deceit, but as someone ready to restore order, to hold the person who had betrayed me accountable, and to take back what was mine. I reminded myself every day that revenge was not my goal, justice was, and that careful planning, patience, and intelligence would ensure that I could rebuild what had been damaged while maintaining my integrity and dignity. Every move I made was deliberate, every decision informed by the knowledge I had painstakingly gathered, and every day I grew stronger, calmer, and more determined, feeling the tide slowly turning in my favor as the path to reclaiming my life and my assets became clearer and more achievable. The day finally came when I felt ready, when the weeks of careful preparation, documentation, and quiet observation culminated in a single moment where I would confront Helen with the undeniable truth of what she had done. I remember the morning vividly, the sun barely rising over the horizon, casting a pale light through the blinds as I reviewed the stacks of documents, photographs of signatures, financial statements, and investigative notes. One last time I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of nervous anticipation and a strange sense of relief. I had been carrying the weight of betrayal for so long that this confrontation felt like both a reckoning and a release. I called Helen, asking her to meet me at the office under the guise of discussing some mundane family matter. She arrived, dressed neatly as always, smiling as though nothing had changed, her eyes glinting with that familiar charm that had once disarmed me for decades. I could feel the tension coiling in my chest as I guided her to a seat, my hands resting firmly on the edge of the table to steady myself. I began slowly, calmly, laying out each piece of evidence one by one, each transaction, each loan, each forged signature presented with meticulous clarity and precision. I could see her face shift gradually as I spoke, the confident, carefree expression melting into unease, then fear. She tried at first to charm her way out, to distract me with jokes, flattery, even tears, as if she could manipulate her way past the truth. But this time it did not work. The preparation, the evidence, and my own calm determination formed a wall that could not be breached. The more she tried, the more transparent her tactics became, like a thin veil fluttering in the wind until it finally tore away completely. I watched her confidence crumble, her carefully constructed lies dissolving like paper caught in a storm. Her eyes darted nervously, her hands fidgeted, and for the first time, I saw the real fear of accountability reflected in her gaze. I did not gloat, I did not shout, I simply observed, the sense of justice washing over me in a slow, quiet tide. I felt a relief I had not known in months, A release from the oppressive weight of deceit that had haunted my every thought. Her betrayal had been laid bare, and I could finally breathe, think clearly, and see the path forward. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as the storm that had gripped my mind began to subside. My life, which had felt fragile and out of control, was slowly beginning to restore itself, piece by piece, as I realized that I had reclaimed not just my assets, but my sense of agency, my confidence, and my ability to protect what I had built over decades. I understood then that this turning point was not about punishment or vengeance. It was about clarity and justice, about reclaiming control over a life that had been momentarily stolen from me. The hours passed in that room like a lifetime, each moment cementing the truth. And as Helen's defenses collapsed entirely, I felt a quiet, deep satisfaction knowing that the deception and betrayal that had threatened to consume me were finally confronted, named, and laid to rest. I could finally envision the future again, steady and unshaken. My mind clear enough to plan the next steps of rebuilding, not only my business and finances, but my life, my peace of mind, and my trust in the values I had always held dear.